about youth engagement in museums. And I think it's widely recognised that this is an increasingly crucial work within our organisations. And what we'll do this evening is talk a little bit about, how can you get into it? How can you get into it as a career? And how can you, once you've got a job in youth engagement, how can you excel at it? And I think just to start everything off, I'm going to ask each of our panellists in turn just to introduce themselves and where they work, and tell us the 3 words that the young people you work with would describe you with. And would we be all right to start with you, Esther?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Esther. I work at Leeds Museums and Galleries, which is part of in Leeds, part of Leeds City Council, and I'm based mostly at Leeds City Museum. I started off as a learning officer, so doing the school groups, but I've been a youth engagement officer for about 10 years, and I sit in the community team, so a little bit of both. 3 words that my people I work with describe me. I've completely failed because I haven't got 3. One person, we were doing it on a group chat, and one person wrote God, and I wasn't sure if that was like a sort of exasperated exclamation or if it was a genuine description. And anyway, it's only 1 word. And then someone else does the boring stuff, but there's like an extra few words so we don't have to, which I think is crucial. But if I'm limited to 3 words, then I'm either God or I do boring stuff. I'm also aware that some people I work with in a voluntary capacity, some of our volunteers are in this. So I'm really sorry if I say anything. Please put on the chat if I'm misrepresenting anything I do. And thank you for having me, Fair Museum Jobs.
Oh, thank you for being with us, and hello to some of Esther's friends. Marie, would you go next, please?
Hi, I'm Marie. I am Learning Associate working with young people for the University of Cambridge Museums. To work across 8 museums, have a science and art collections. I've worked in youth engagement pretty much my whole career, so probably, 15, 16 years, I don't know, maybe. I'm not very good at maths, clearly. The words that they probably used to describe me would be funny, supportive, and one of my favourite terms ever was when I was described as a museum fairy. So quite liked that. I know that's more than 3 words, so I am sorry.
It's okay. I'm not strict about the 3 really. And Rebecca, would you mind joining in?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Rebecca. I'm the learning officer at Gressenhall Farm and Workhouse. And yes, similar. I was brave and I asked young people to describe me. And if I probably summarise what they said into 3 words were supportive, honest, and open.
Oh, that's lovely.
And
Kiran?
Hi, everyone. So my name's Kiran Sahota. I'm a self-taught historian, researcher, and everything else in between. And I'm really passionate about this, joining this panel today. I have a bit of a background working with youth. I used to be an ex-teacher, worked in the prison service, educating. I worked in a Category B prison with male prisoners and done the education side. And now I do my projects with young people. The 3 words, I'm going to be really careful as well. They call me strict because I always want them on time, and I make them do their homework. They call me bossy as well. I'm passionate and a bit crazy because you've got to love what you're doing.
That's amazing. And Rhiannon.
Hi, so I'm Rhiannon Litterick. I am Learning Officer at Sir John Soane's Museum. I started as Youth Panel Facilitator, then became Learning Officer, and then it merged into one mass. I didn't ask my young people because I forgot, but there's 2 lots of 3 words. I think they'd either say colour-coded spreadsheet, because I'm obsessed with them, or makes it happen. I'm the do-it lady, always.
That's amazing. I was just writing down makes it happen. I think we all in museums want to be that person, or at least work with that person. So thanks so much, everybody. We'll move on to kind of talking about what are the skills that you think are really kind of essential for these roles, the roles that you're in now. And if we could start with you, Rebecca, would that be all right? I think you're muted, Rebecca, sorry.
No, so yeah, sorry, I didn't click it properly. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, so mainly, I work with young people on kind of work placements and projects, project-based work. So for those, I think there's kind of 3 sets of skills, I would say. The first one is you have to be really great at listening and be really open-minded. And if you want to work with young people in a way that's engaging to them, you have to be actively listen, to take their thoughts on board and willing to change your mind as well. And I think as well, communication skills I think are really, really important. And I've looked at strengthening my own kind of mentoring and coaching skills so that you can support them as well, but make sure you're empowering them. And the last one is as well about flexibility and understanding. And I think with young people, their lives are changing so rapidly that I think you have to be very flexible to that, but also be understanding that you'll probably be working with them on a kind of more short-term basis because they probably won't be available for a long-term commitment. So really making sure that in the short term, you're doing something really meaningful and worthwhile.
Thanks so much. And Kiran, would you be able to come in?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry, what was the question? I was making notes from the. Sorry.
No, don't apologise. What skills are needed for your role? Or what skills are most important in your role?
Sorry, I should be making notes actually. I was going to say a bit similar to what Rebecca's saying, understanding if you're working in a particular community, like I work with a lot of the Black communities and the South Asian communities, just be very careful as well what's going on in their surroundings. As many of us, we're not in the school, but we're working with young people. So again, flexibility and understanding, especially if they're in that gang culture and they're coming to you to learn something, we have to change our mindset. So I would say again, and don't be bothered if they don't do the homework, just as long as they're engaging. I always say just speak openly and this is a safe space so that they know if they're ever in trouble, we've got their back, if that makes sense. So everything else that Rebecca said, but just understanding as well anything else is going on in their community.
Yeah, I think that point on understanding of those communities is so valuable. We've had a question as well that's kind of that's related in terms of skills, but it's, do you need certain qualifications for this type of work, or do you kind of have you got your job through transferable skills as well? And I wondered if I could come to Marie on that one.
I don't feel like I've probably got the usual museum route because I've got a drama degree, and to be honest, at the beginning of my career I did get a bit of snobbery about it, like, you know, what's that got to do with museums and but there's so many transferable skills from my degree because it's about engaging people basically. So I think some places obviously ask for more qualifications than others, but I feel like, you know, I don't feel like there is one qualification. I mean, I'm sure the panel might disagree with me, but I don't feel like there is one qualification that kind of sums it all up. There are so many skills are needed for this job, but more than anything, it's passion and enthusiasm and just having that creativity and wanting to work with young people and make a difference. So I don't know, I found it very early on in my career. I don't get it so much now I've got the experience, like no one really sort of questions it now. But at the beginning, I did get it quite a lot. So yeah. But I do know some places ask for PGCEs. I don't have a PGCE. I don't have an MA. So yeah, I know different places ask for different qualifications. But yeah.
Oh, thanks, Marie. Thanks so much. And we've also got another question that again is on this kind of what skills you need and how can you work in this sector, but it's what kind of experience would you recommend people getting if they want to work in youth engagement in museums or in an allied sector? And I wondered if I could come to you, Esther, please.
Yes, of course. It's quite interesting because I suppose it's a similar question to the ones that we've just been discussing about skills for the role, qualifications and experience. And actually, I'd written down exactly the same as everyone else has written down, which I think is good because it means we're sort of on the same wavelength. Although I wonder how helpful that is if you're thinking, I want to break into museums. What's the answer? I want to work in youth engagement. What do I need to go out and get? So honestly, people skills. Anything to do with people. If I was recruiting someone to do my job or to come and support me to do my job, I would want to know what they've done with people, because I think so much of what we do is about building a relationship and being compassionate and listening, and I think it's so important that you can do that. But then what I'm going to say now is almost completely contradictory to that, which is a very important essence of youth engagement. It's very contradictory. So as well as being building this relationship that's got to be real, it's not about a false relationship. You've also got to have very strict boundaries in place, because obviously we've got to think about safeguarding and risks and all that kind of thing. But more than that, I think if you just like open the doors to the museum and say you can do whatever you want, that's actually very intimidating for people to think, oh, I'm doing a display or I'm doing an event. So I think those kind of boundaries about where the museum stands, being honest about what we can and can't do, and where people stand with me, what the relationship with me is, what my limitations are, I think that's really important. And my final contradiction to all of that is that you've also got to be completely flexible, because you could plan something and it could be, it could be the best plan in the world, and then it just turns up and someone's had such a terrible day at college. You can't do that at all, and you've got to quickly think on your head and like pull a game of Pictionary out of the bag, because that's what needs to be done in the moment. So in answer to your question, Lucy, what qualifications and experience and skills you need, I would be really interested in the sector moving towards people that can demonstrate those kind of transferable skills. I can think on the spot, I'm used to having, I don't know, a screaming toddler next to me that I've just got to deal with that situation. So therefore, I can deal with a very stressful situation in a museum, or I'm used to working in a bank and being put on the spot. So therefore, I think we need to recognise that some of our skills are transferable and they're not all gained in an MA qualification.
Absolutely. Transferable skills are such a big topic within the whole summit as a whole. We'll just move on to a slightly different question now. Because you've talked a lot about how dynamic your relationships can be with the people you work with. What have you learned, or what skills have you learned from working with young people? So you've presumably taught people things, but what have you kind of learned in return? And Rhiannon, would you be able to come in on that?
I think the most important skill that I've learned is active listening. So I had a tendency before I did PGCE, I found it really useful for working with young people, but it's not directly transferable, because when you're taking that learning outside the classroom and the young people are choosing to come, so I run a youth panel, it's 50% them putting on events, 50% them acting as a sounding board, they're volunteering their time. So it's really important to value that. And if you're, as I started, sort of talking across them, that's not respecting and valuing their time. So I've learned to wait and to sort of think about body language and sort of soft skills as well as facilitation skills, and thinking, having a level of self-awareness that's definitely deepened as it's come across, to have, like Esther was talking about, those boundaries of, I look very young, but I'm older than all of you, and I'm with you and I'm here to support you, but I'm not part of the panel. I'm not going to join in with your conversations about what you did at the weekend and the pubs you've been to, because I have a different relationship with you, whilst also working collaboratively with you. But yeah, definitely active listening and empathy. Those are the things that I've really, over the 3 years I've facilitated the youth panel, I have really developed, and I've really enjoyed it as well.
Oh, that's amazing. And yeah, so great to kind of see everyone nodding along as well. Yeah. I'm going to add a question, because now we've sort of talked a little bit about roots and skills, but I wanted to ask everyone in turn, kind of can you describe briefly like a project that you've worked on that you've really enjoyed, or that you have really seen the benefit from, so people get a flavour for the kinds of things that happen. And I wondered if I could start with you, Marie.
I think one of my kind of favourite projects is from quite a few years ago when I was working at Norfolk Museum Service, actually, Rebecca. And I ran a series of projects for young people classed as NEET, so not in employment, education or training. And we used to work, I used to work with a group of young people, and I'd improve their soft skills. So we'd look at things like interviewing skills. And it was all about trying to find transferable skills to be able to get into work. So it was all about working together, communication, and we did qualifications with a local college as we went, because a lot of the young people dropped out and didn't have qualifications. And there were, for example, there were young people in that group that had been very, very badly bullied and had been dropped out of school because of it. And so by the end, I think nearly all of them had got jobs, and the young person that had been really badly bullied managed to go back to college. And that just felt like such a massive, massive thing. And I know, talking about that, I'm not actually mentioning objects or museums, but the museum was the place where it happened. And it was sort of a safe space for the young people. And it was about creating that safe space and that encouragement. And everyone in the panels talked about supporting and listening. Yeah, so that would probably be mine.
Thanks. And Esther?
I was really interested in what Marie just said, which was a really basically heartwarming story, the sort of that could be made into a film. And then she said, but that story doesn't include museums and objects. And one of the things that I've learned is not to be so hard on myself. Like when I first started out in museums, like I had to go and justify what I was doing to senior managers. And if it didn't include a direct link to our collection, this is prior to being a youth officer, it's also not in the organisation I work at the moment. But if it didn't include a direct link to the museum collection, the project didn't get passed and I couldn't do it. And actually, what I've learned, and actually there's a question here about COVID, and it's something that I've learned particularly during COVID, is just that being a person that builds a relationship then leads to fantastic work happening that's not on my terms. So like over COVID, I've just been talking to people on the phone or having Zooms or having like endless WhatsApp chats or listening to people tell me about what they're watching on Netflix. And then suddenly a little seed will come from that, which does link back to the museum, and it does show that the museum or the collection is a safe space. And you know what, if it doesn't, then it means that what we're doing at the museum isn't relevant, not the other way around. We need to change what we're doing at the museum, not change what young people want to do. So I think that has been, I can't even remember what the question was, Lucy, I'm so sorry, but that has been something that I've massively learned, which is that it doesn't all have to explicitly link to the museum. I'm at the museum, it will work itself out, it will link in some way. Does that answer the question? I can't remember.
It doesn't matter. Don't worry. But that does segue. I'm just going to change the question slightly into one that I just written down, which was how do you negotiate when you're working with a group of young people who maybe have an idea for a project, and maybe the museum is much more reticent towards that project, or perhaps you need to get funding for that project and you're not sure whether that's something that's going to be funded. And would I be able to come to you with that, Rebecca?
Yeah, sure. And it's almost like the example I was going to use was there was a lot of reticence from the museums I was working with as well. And it was an LGBTQ plus project, and I worked with the local university kind of prize society and local secondary school to develop ideas as well. And I really wanted to make sure their voice was heard, and they obviously felt it was, but there was a lot of collaboration, a lot of me then going backwards and forwards and negotiating, but making sure that their voice essentially was at the heart of it. And I think the outcome was really successful, in which most of the students I was working with said they'd never been to either museum before that I was working on. They said, to quote, they said the history wasn't for them. But then since they've, the work made them feel really empowered, and then I've also been asked to attend kind of their events, and then we're working on future as well events together. So I think that's been a really good kind of built relationship. But as you say, I think what made that a key to success was also a really long lead in. So this was a long time in advance that I was thinking I want to put this work out in a year. And so this kind of long lead in which then I would do that kind of most of the work in negotiating, but as well still making sure that their voice was heard.
Can I just say, I think it's really important to be honest with our young people as well, because no one's really going to respect you if you're not honest about, you know, all the running. We've all been there, the kind of negotiating, running between the museum and the young people. I think it's really, I'm always really honest about whether I think something can happen. And if it can't happen, then I try my best to explain why. Because I think there's nothing worse than building up a relationship and then the young people feeling like they're kind of being muted.
Yeah, I can only imagine how that might feel to deliver that message. Kiran, your model works slightly differently. I wondered if you could talk to us a bit about connecting youth engagement with funders and how that works.
Sorry, I couldn't find the button to unmute. Yeah, so I know you, Lucy, but just to give people a little bit of a background, I went into looking into my own family history, and I ended up applying for, finding some letters, applying for Heritage Lottery funding on the £10,000 back in 2016. And it all went crazy. So I thought I'd do one project and go back and nobody would care. Saying that in relation, the reason I say that my first project, and then I'm going to go back to how we worked, is when I was looking for a space, I had the funding from National Lottery Heritage Fund, but I couldn't find a space. And one of the museums in Birmingham, when I first started, let me down, and they were asking for too much for a little room. And then, but it was Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery actually that gave me a free space at their community, in their community space. And that 3 months for somebody coming into the sector, because I work in corporate before doing the history work, it gave me a real chance to find out where my audience was. So I worked a little bit backwards, but coming into that, the staff were really great. And I always say to everybody, if you are looking for museum space, if you've got the right connector, they will allow your project to be launched in different ways. And that actually then catapulted me onto our second project during the centenary back in 2018. And Lucy took a chance on me and said, listen, we've got to do something in Leeds because there's a big South Asian community there and we've got these stories. And we ended up working together. And I think that was collaborative working together and creating, again, you're going to get bored of me saying these safe spaces, but our community were really engaging. And so coming into a museum, most of our audiences that attended that day didn't come to the museum. So they were asking me for directions. We had representatives from armed forces as well. So it's a great way of engaging young kids. And I think we were looking at maybe a bigger space. And for my third project that I'm currently undertaking now, Indian Women in War, we were actually in conversation to come to Leeds and have a space. So museums are great if you've got that great connector, and it does really work in my benefit because it gives us a chance to then explain, you can go upstairs and do this, or did you know there's a cafe, and links those people. So now people are waiting for us to again. I keep tagging you in a lot of stuff on social media. Are you coming to Leeds again? Are you going to do this? And we brought in just regular people wanting to share their stories. Do you remember the mother and the daughter? And we nearly cried. It's bringing people in to tell their stories because they don't have a space. And Lucy and her team created that space working with me to allow my speakers to have a wonderful day. And it's congratulations, because us coming back to Leeds again for this project means that there is an audience wanting to enter. So we just need to keep on working and keep doing events at museums so they're more aware.
Thanks, Kiran. I think I'm blushing, so I'm going to move on.
Right.
But it's congratulations to you, really, and all the work that you do. I'm keeping an eye on the chat as well, and we touched on it with Esther's comment, but how has your kind of work programmes changed in response to COVID? And I think I'd add, do you think there are elements that are going to stick now, or will everything kind of go back to normal, do you hope? And could I come to Rhiannon on that, please?
Of course. So it's been an odd year this year. So without giving you my whole life story, I went on maternity leave. I came back on the 11th of February, facilitated the youth panel again. Yeah, Esther's face says it all. We were running a late on the 23rd of April, turning the museum into the underworld, God, Myth and Ritual, until suddenly we were not running a late. We had to package that late up. And then the Corona coaster got us and the learning team was furloughed. So we had this absolutely mad dash to get all of the knowledge. The young people had done loads of work. The museum were excited. We'd sold out of young people's tickets at a special rate the first time the museum had offered it. And we started packaging it, put it on ice, asked the young people, said we can't hold meetings whilst there's no learning team. So can you please write up any things? The volunteer manager, as they count as volunteers, she's also involved in the youth panel facilitation, and she was keeping in touch with them. And then when I came back, we obviously meetings are all on Zoom. And I think having a mixture of in-person and online meetings will stick because it's meant more flexibility. Our young people come from all over London, and I think that will stick and make sure that they can come to meetings, and being able to record them has been invaluable. When young people, they all have things on, particularly at the moment with job applications and university applications, they can't all come to every meeting. So having that frame of reference is useful, and I think that will stick. However, it's made us think more about what we're offering. So rather than working on really long-term projects like an event, we've moved to smaller things. So they're doing an intervention for an exhibition, and we've got 3 weeks to do it from start to finish. We've got to have it done mid-December, which is in no way terrifying. But we're thinking about skills and short-term wins, right? Because we had the disappointment of the late's ready to go now. They've done an amazing job of packaging it up. We don't know when it's going to happen. Who knows? And so we're focusing on shorter term, tangible success, small wins, soft skills, lots of different experiences. And I think that's going to inform our programming for the next year.
Oh, amazing, thanks. Esther, could you go back to kind of what you touched on about COVID before?
I found it really hard with COVID. We were in a similar position in that we were about to open, in May, we were due to open a display that had been curated by one of our groups, the Preservative Party, about mental health. And I was incredibly proud of how much of themselves had gone into that display, and it had been a really tough display. And that stopping completely in the middle was something that professionally and personally I found quite hard. We tried to carry it on remotely, and a sterling job has been done. It's been like much slower. But every time we're in Yorkshire, so every time we think we've hit a tier 2, which means we can get back in to do stuff, we get moved to another restriction. So it's been stop-start, and I think that has been really tricky. Also, I've found it very difficult because I know that some people do not, for whatever reason, want to interact on Zoom. And some people that I was working with very closely, not necessarily in groups, but in one-to-one, who I felt were making real progress with how they felt in the museum and the skills they were picking up, and I was learning an awful lot from how to work with them, have just dropped off the radar completely. And I've found that really difficult because it's really sad to see that go. And I know that that's something that is happening across the youth sector, that a lot of the Zooms that I'm in outside of museums with other youth groups are really super engaged young people, and maybe some people who would benefit from face-to-face. It's not happening. In terms of trying to be more positive, once lockdown lifted a little bit, we started to meet in parks when we could, with 5 or 6 of us having coffees and just catch-ups, and that honestly felt like Christmas every day. Or doing like socially distanced walks where it'd just be like me and one other person. As soon as I'm allowed to do that again, I will be. I took someone to McDonald's, much to everyone else's like disgruntledness. Why do they get to go? And just little things, I suppose, on people's personal levels. I've managed to carry on, but I have really missed it. And the other thing is that I'm not an expert in the subject matter of what we do. I would definitely say that the people that do the research and get the community voices are the young volunteers that work on it. And there were a few instances where people disappeared off the radar, and they've done a tremendous amount of work for displays that the museum has now not got. And that is really heartbreaking from a lost voices perspective as well, because some really great work was being done. And I think we perhaps need to be a bit better at valuing all of our volunteers, so that when things like this happen again, we don't lose all that expertise.
Oh, thanks, Esther. Kiran.
I was just going to add to what Esther was saying about that. So although we don't have, I keep saying that I'm not in a museum, I didn't realise that some of the young people I worked with were also carers. So COVID has really affected, and not everybody in the areas that I work in, because I work in some of the most deprived areas up and down the country, especially in Birmingham. So we lost some of ours. Nobody had told us that they're carers, or so when we finally got in touch with them, they explained the situation. So we were shut down in March. By May, when we kind of figured out, why haven't you been in touch? They explained the reasons. And I think sometimes, although we do background checks on staff, it wasn't raised to the school neither. So some of the young kids in the vulnerable situation keep it to themselves, because the young girl was saying she thought she'll be taken away from her mother if she told anyone that she was a carer. So we've had to now change our plans as well, going back to the schools when we can, is maybe get them onto little projects so someone is still in communication with them. But we don't realise the environments that they're in, and COVID really brought out just how vulnerable some people are, and now to engage them back, we've got to work on a different system.
Right, thanks very much, Kiran. We've had a question in the chat about more generally and about how you recruit young people to your different programmes. And I know, was it you, Rhiannon, who was saying you were about to overhaul what you were doing? Yeah, would you be able to talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes. Yeah, of course. So full disclosure, I've been doing a master's in socially engaged practice in museums and galleries at Leicester. That's something that is part-time. I had a baby, the Corona coaster, it's taken me forever. And one of my projects was on overhauling recruitment for our youth panel, because our youth panel are fantastic, they're committed, they're amazingly passionate. They are not representative of young Londoners. They are white, middle class, and mostly female. The way that we've recruited previously has been through, we put it on our social media, we've let existing young volunteers know, we've gone through schools and colleges, we've used contacts, because I used to be a teacher. At one point, the panel was made up of people I used to teach, people who already knew about the museum. And it was great, because when I started, the youth panel hadn't existed for a few years. The learning team at the Soane went from 4 full-time people to 1 person 1 day a week at its smallest, and it's built back up over the last 4 years. And so it was great to get the ball rolling, but now is the time that we need to make it more representative. So I did a research project. I spoke to lots of different people running youth panels and youth engagement projects in national museums, because the Soanes are national, even though we're teeny tiny, and over in the southeast, and gathered all that knowledge. We had a really good meeting. I also read lots of different articles and things about museums engaging with different people, and we've come up sort of with a plan that's about, hopefully, things for us to be rolled out, of contacting a wider range. So yes, social media, focusing on Instagram, because that's what our young people have said they use most, rather than Twitter, because Twitter seems to be museum people, angry older people, and then more of a mixture, to generalise. We're also looking at working with council engagement teams, social workers, working with colleges and schools that we have no relationship with, getting to know a key contact. I think once you know a named person and build those relationships that will take time, it's much easier. And we're also overhauling how we work. So we started saying the young people are going to run a project and they'll tell us what it is, but without boundaries, they don't know what they're able to do in the museum. They're like, there's this historic 18th century house where there's a lot, the conversation we had about whether it's called a railing or a fence for an event that we ran is a period of my life I'll never get back. But they needed to know what they could and couldn't do with expectations. Kiran's laughing. And yeah, and now that they know more, we think that what we're going to do is shift from those projects to short scale skills focused, because we think that we might vary the people we get applying. If it's not just come to us if you love museums, if we say come to us because you want experience running events for other young people, come to us because you want experience of organising, of negotiating, teamwork, working with lots of different people, thinking about marketing and focusing on that aspect in both how we advertise our activities and in how we programme, using our existing youth panel to set the tone for what they've told us what they want and what they want to do and why they joined, and starting to use that as a basis. So it's much more collaborative and welcoming, rather than we're a museum and we're wonderful, come to us if you like museums, because that's not going to attract young Londoners. And as a national, I feel very passionately that we're partially paid for by the people, we should be for the people, and we'll see how it goes. So wish me luck, because that starts next week.
Good luck. I think we're all sending you good luck. Marie, would you be able to talk a little bit about recruitment?
Yeah, obviously it depends on the project you're working on and what you're doing. I always find charities and community groups are a really, really good way in. I'm doing that royal we thing. I won a tender with Cambridgeshire County Council to deliver a programme aimed at young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And then we get the recruitment process kind of almost taken care of, because the social workers feed young people who might be interested into our project. And that then enabled us to start a bigger SEND programme across the UCM. But yeah, all the obvious things that everyone said, really. I can't think of anything else. Social media, groups, schools. I don't tend to go down the school route massively. I don't know why. Maybe that's just me being strange. But I tend to more get out into the community and meet people in the community. Yeah.
Sorry, I lost the unmute button myself. And Rebecca, does it kind of differ with working in East Anglia and somewhere a bit more rural?
Yeah, so, and as Marie kind of said earlier, I'm in a museum that's part of Norfolk Museum Service, so we've also got the Norfolk County Council, so we can link through them as well, and so like the fostering service, for instance, as well, so we've got that support. But as you say, it's not as easy being rural, because there's a massive issue with transport. There's one bus that goes past us sporadically, so that's really, really difficult. So actually, what we've had to do is ask for funding specifically for that in order to help support that. But we've found, as Rhiannon said there, actually, we've in the last 2 years kind of really adapted our work experience and work placements to focus much more on skills. So, and offering them a bespoke program, so that we've really advertised that. So essentially we've given a whole selection of like different activities they can do, which will build the skills, and they choose then from them on what skills they want to do. So that, I think, has meant that we've had far more engagements with us, but also we've adapted them for COVID as well. So tried to offer similar things digitally, but fingers crossed, obviously in 2021, that will also be combined with on-site. But actually the digital aspect has also helped us, the fact that we're rural, we can still be connected.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I grew up somewhere extremely rural, so I'm always like interested in that aspect of what museums do now. I noticed quite early on in the chat there was a comment about kind kind of decolonisation and the role that museums can have in that, and I'm also interested in how that intersects with youth programming as well, or does it not? I think there's lots of people in the museum world who are thinking very much about it, but are the young people that you're working with, I think, is a big question. And I wondered, could I come to Esther to begin with?
that feels like a huge question, Lucy. Thank you. Do you know, I don't know, because I haven't directly asked many of the people I work with, what do you think about decolonisation, and how we should address it, partly because I think I kind of know the answer from quite a few people. What I think I would like to say on this is that there's been a bit of chat in the group about recruitment, and I think this question is similar to that, which is people saying, why aren't people doing this thing that we want to do? And I think instead what we should be saying is, what do these people want to do, and how can we do it? So I know that politically right now I should be looking at decolonisation, and to be fair, the Conservative Party that have been working with the museum for 10 years or whatever are now pretty clued up, so would be quite happy to do that. But I also know that people I take around the museum look and see themselves not reflected in the galleries, and that to me is this is decolonisation, and that's people not being reflected in the galleries. So really, I think things will come in and out of fashion. Oh gosh, I'm going to get massacred on the chat for this. Things will come in and out of fashion for the next few years in terms of what we should and shouldn't be doing. But I think what we should be doing is, every time we take a young person around our galleries and they don't think it's for them, we shouldn't shout louder to persuade them that it is. We should say, oh, right, okay, what do we need to do so it is for you then? What do we need to do? My job isn't to persuade you, it's to change, to listen and to change. Does that dodge the question or answer the question? Let's see what the chat says.
I mean, I love the answer. I always think museums should change in response to people, not the other way around. But that's my chair's bias. I saw kind of different people nodding and smiling in that. I don't know if anyone's got anything else to add. I don't know if you want to wave, because I know it's a big question. Yeah, Rebecca.
Yeah, we've this year I've set up a specific decolonisation work placement with students from the local university, and so we've got 3 students that are looking through our collections and that on a decol lens. But also what I really wanted to pilot with them was a decol way of working. This is a lot what Esther just said, is exceeding power and making sure that their voice is actually heard. And that's how I view decolonisation through youth engagement, and that's essentially what it is all the time when it's done at its best, is when we give them a voice and we give them a space for that to permanently change the structure of the museum. And that's where I think it has real relevance in place.
Thanks so much. I'm aware that time is ticking and that the evening is moving on. So I've got a couple more questions. And I think I want to acknowledge there's been lots of questions coming through in the chat, and really great advice as well. And I'm sorry we can't kind of answer everything. But one of them is, you're obviously motivating people a lot of the time, but how do you keep your own motivation going? And I wondered if you could kind of come in on that, Kiran, to begin with.
I think I just love what I do. Honestly, I didn't know anything about archives back in 2015, and going on this journey, I'm on a journey with the young people, if that makes sense. So I actually love finding archives, and I can't wait to share it with them. And we've come like a little community in a community, because not everybody is going to like our work, and we've had critics, you know, let's be honest about that, but the kids really love it, and they're like, Miss, can you tell me more? Or they call me by my name, like Kiran. And I think that's what keeps me motivated, is we're having these conversations on, especially during the centenary, for my community. I say my community as if I own them, but if it wasn't for the centenary, I wouldn't have got into this. And now that I've got questions, even though the centenary is over, that's only the beginning of us recognising Commonwealth contribution. So while I've still got the passion, I'm going to continue telling the stories. And just really lucky with the new project Indian Women and War, because it's a women focused. And we do include British women who were living in India at that time, so it wasn't always Indian women. For our young people, they're curious, and while they're still curious, I get them involved, and also our older communities as well. So women in their 50s whose parents lived in the partition, that was a generation that had questions but nobody asked because it wasn't taught in schools, and mass migration. And so we include everybody together, and that's what keeps me going. Actually, I love it. I'm still smiling. I'm tired most of the time, and if you all want to take a trip from Birmingham on a coach to Brighton with 35 to 40 young people, please be my guest. You know, the conversations from love lives and everything, but it's honestly because this people are being curious. So we've just, that keeps us going, and if we have no sleep, then we have no sleep.
Yeah. How do you keep motivated, Marie?
I just really love my job. I'm one of those really annoying people. Like, you know, when people celebrate a job and I'm like, no, I really like it, and they don't believe you. I love my job. I love that no day is really ever the same. I never quite know, you know, what project I'm working on, what's going to happen that day. And I love that. It just keeps me on my toes. And this is going to sound really cheesy, but I really love it when you get the young people who suddenly get really into what you're doing and they're doing, and you see it in their eyes, and they get really into it, and they feel included, and like the museum's a place for them. And I feel like there's so much to do, like to get to a point where young people feel like they can come through our doors and feel welcome. So I feel like that keeps me motivated. Obviously we all get tired, I'm not going to lie, but you know, working with the young people is what keeps me going, really.
Oh, yeah, we all need people. And I've kind of got a question, and I'd really like, yeah, just really like as honest answers as you're able to give. But what's really been the highlight of your career to date? Like, what's the thing that's always going to stick in your mind? And Rhiannon, could we come to you?
So for me, I think it was in 2019. So the Youth Panel started in 2017. In 2018, they ran an event for the London Festival of Architecture. They gave spotlight talks. They came up with the talks with a bit of the way the process works with the museum. Somebody from the library and archive had to check the veracity of what they were saying. They ran the event, and it was manned them doing the event. And the following year, the process of watching them do another event for the London Festival of Architecture on a different theme, and watching them say, oh, well, last year you did an event brief. Can I help you with that? Oh, last year we tried this year, can we do an intervention? We want to weave for the theme of boundaries. We want to weave onto the railings. We want to weave and create this intervention between Lincoln's Fields and the museum. And watching them grow in confidence. And I was pregnant during this, and very unwell and pregnant. And when the event actually happened in June, I was 7.5 months pregnant. It was tropical warmth. And I just didn't have to run around because they just flew. And it was like watching them fly the nest, running this event. One of them was a runner. They were offering me cups of tea, and I was like, what is this? The dynamics changed completely, and it was just amazing. And afterwards they were like, we smashed that, and we had the highest engagement we've had on Instagram in a weekend ever from their takeover. All the museum staff who'd been a bit sort of, oh, we're going to let the youths run riot, suddenly were like, what are they doing? I'm going to come. The director was just wandering around, having chats with them, loving life, watching it, and watching people be supportive and say, you know, of course they can do this. We saw how great last year was. And I just afterwards just felt like the proudest sort of museum parent in the whole wide world. It was just magical.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Rebecca, would you be all right to come in?
Yeah, so one thing, when I moved to museum work, it was a career shift from a secondary school teacher, and one of the things I really missed was having long-term engagement with young people. And so, and I really miss working with secondary school students. So one thing that I worked on, we kind of touched on earlier, I connected with a local secondary school to the museum. And again, even though, again, that's the closest school to the museum, even though it's been rural, they still didn't come to the museum. So that I was trying to get them to engage with it. And we started on some really value-led projects. So I worked with a group there on LGBTQ+. And then the school really wanted to kind of promote this, and that worked really well. And then the next year they were like, could we work together on another project? I was like, yes, great. And then and so we did a climate crisis project with a geography group. And then this year, again, they've come back and said, can we do a Black History project? And I was like, yes. And then and they're looking to embed it into their curriculum in a very permanent way for their students. So for me, that's been a real highlight in working collaboratively with that local school to continually work with young people in a way that's current, a way that's relevant and really meaningful and value-led. And I've really seen that lovely engagement, and we obviously really respect each other and each other's values and what we can bring. So that's been a real highlight for me.
Thanks. And Kiran, what's your highlight?
A highlight, well, it has to be over the centenary in our last project, when one of our young people was part of the Westminster Abbey centenary celebrations, and he got to lay a wreath out in front of the royal family and dignitaries. And I think that was in 2018, with the, you know, marking the centenary. I couldn't have wished it to go any other way. But the other highlight is the young people that had no hope to go to higher education were able to get them into higher education, get them into work placements, and just get them the skills. And honestly, that's just my highlight. For them to say, Miss, you've changed it, and coming from the areas that they come from, I know I talk a lot about those areas, but it's because I was one of them. So I know what it's like, and then they see me as a role model, but it is tough. So any way that we can do collaborative working is really the highlight of my career.
Thanks, Kiran. And Marie, please.
I think one of my kind of highlights is being able to find a way to engage with young people with special educational needs, disabilities, and their families, and create groups and times at the museum where they feel comfortable. And I did a lot of work with focus groups with parents and young people, and trying to find the best way to enable that audience to come to the museum. And when I see the feedback that when the parents and the young people are saying, you know, they feel welcome, they want to come back to the museum, that feels like a really huge deal, because our sort of visitor figures for young people with disabilities was and adults with disabilities was very low. So to kind of feel like we're on that journey of moving forward and thinking about what could come next, that's really exciting, but also something I'm really proud of.
Thanks. And Esther.
I've got two things, and we've got 1 minute left, so I'll have to give them 30 seconds each. I think that as youth engagement officers and as museums, we've got a responsibility to put our money where our mouth is, and we should really be getting young people jobs in museums as well, which is almost impossible when there aren't any. And last year, someone that I've worked with for a very, very long time, and who possibly won't have a job ever, this young man may possibly be someone who's unemployed or lives on different benefits. He managed to feel comfortable enough to apply for a role in our museum, and he got a job interview, and he didn't get the job, so I haven't by any way or means succeeded there. But I have to say, everybody involved cried just at the steps that he'd made and how incredible that was. And the other thing that I am proud of and that motivates me and is the finest thing is getting proved wrong every day about everything. First of all, on a macro level, because everything I think I know about museums and how they run, people constantly ask me questions that challenges that and makes me think, well, I don't even know why we do it that way. You're absolutely right. Let's do it a different way. And also on a museum object level, people I work with now know more about the objects than me. They refer to them as our this and our that. And I can't tell you the amount of times I've been doing a tour and I've looked out and seen someone I've worked with and thought, I know what I'm saying isn't right. That person's going to call me out on it. And they should do, because they know more than me, because they've worked harder on this. And I think that's just lovely. Getting proved wrong that often by people that you work with is fantastic. Is that a negative turned into a positive? I like the fact that I'm rubbish.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Esther. Thank you so much to everybody on the panel and everyone in the audience. Just before we go, I know there's quite a few people who've said that they're on their own kind of museums youth panels with us this evening. So I just want to say a big hello. And earlier in the week on Monday, some of the team from Manchester gave a presentation as well about what they've been doing. And that will be available on YouTube as well. So you'll have a kind of double perspectives on youth engagement once we've done all our YouTube uploading. But I would just like to thank everyone one more time. Thank you to Marie, thank you to Esther, thank you to Rebecca, thank you to Kiran, and thank you to Rhiannon. I've learnt loads, and I hope people have got more of a sense of what a career in youth engagement is like, and I've certainly learnt loads about how I could improve my practice. So thanks so much. I hope everyone has lovely evenings and that you've enjoyed the session tonight. My colleague Tom will kind of close the Zoom shortly, but thank you. It's been a pleasure.